Well, good morning, and welcome to everyone gathered here in the building of All Saints Church, and a special welcome to those joining us online. My name is Randy Hine-Lamb, and I'm here to make a few preliminary remarks, and then to introduce our speaker of the day, Dr. Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkain. I'll attempt to be brief. Though you can't see them, I'm wearing at least two sponsor hats this morning. The first hat is as co-chair, together with my wife, Doni, of the Middle East Ministry, or what we refer to as MEM, M-E-M. Our mission statement will tell you that the MEM is called to educate the parish and the community about the Middle East and to encourage reconciliation, inclusion, justice, and peace based on the values of our common humanity. We think that this fits nicely with the four values we try to embody at All Saints Church: radical inclusion, courageous justice, joyful spirituality, and ethical stewardship. If you don't currently have a spiritual home, I encourage you to consider All Saints. As we like to say, whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, you are welcome here. And if you'd like to know more about the Middle East Ministry, you can contact us at All Saints Mem, that's all one word, All Saints Mem, M-E-M, at gmail.com, or you can give us your contact information over on the literature table. My other invisible hat is that of co-chair, along with the Reverend Joe Rose, of the LA and Orange County chapter of Friends of Seville, North America, or as you'll hear us refer to it, FOSNA, F-O-S-N-A. FOSNA is a 501c3 organization which supports and amplifies the message of Seville, a grassroots movement founded by Palestinian Christians in Jerusalem, who work for a just peace in Palestine and Israel. As the Arabic speakers in this room or online will be able to tell you, Sabeel means the way. It also can mean a water course or a spring. In any case, it strives for a spirituality based on justice, peace, nonviolence, and reconciliation expressed in terms of Palestinian liberation theology. If you'd like to know more about Sabeel, take one of the brochures over on our table, or those online can go to www.sabeel, and that's spelled S-A-B-E-L, www.sabeel.org, or the Friends of Sabeel at www.fosna.org. Enough of the blurbs here. Just before I introduce our speaker, let me advise you that today's presentation and the discussion that we hope will follow is rooted in questions of occupation, displacement, and settler colonialism. So it's entirely appropriate that before we begin pointing fingers, we acknowledge the fact that this location, All Saints Church, Pasadena, California, was once the ancestral stewardship of the Gabrielino Tongva people. We further acknowledge that the Tongva were subjugated, cruelly treated, and nearly eradicated, first by the Spanish Mexican colonizers, and later by American settlers. If you would, join me in a moment of silent observation of our own complicity as inheritors and beneficiaries of those injustices. Thank you. Now, of course, a moment's silence cannot begin to address the issue, and so I encourage all of us to learn more about the indigenous peoples who tended the lands before us, and whenever possible, to find practical ways to make amends for prior wrongs. Our program today will include the presentation, and we'll have, we hope, time for discussion afterwards. And I'd ask you to save your questions, perhaps write them down somewhere, save your questions for the end. Because this is being done online, we may have to repeat the questions so that people online can hear them And unfortunately, to those of you who are online, because of the technology that we're using right now, you will not be able to ask questions of us. Ain't technology grand except when it ain't. Now let me introduce today's speaker. I mentioned wearing several hats today, but Dr. Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkain has me beat in both number of hats and the importance of them. Dr. Nadera is the Lawrence Beale Chair in Law at the Faculty of Law, Institute of Criminology, and the School of Social Work and Public Welfare at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. If that weren't enough, she is also Global Chair in Law at Queen Mary University of London. Her scholarship focuses on knowledge production in relation to accumulative trauma, state criminality, surveillance, gender violence, and law and society. She's the author of innumerable articles and a few books, of which I will mention but three. They include Incarcerated Childhood and the Politics of Unchilding, which was published by Cambridge University Press in 2019. That book was the subject of her presentation the last time she visited All Saints. This was the next one, published in 2021, also by Cambridge Press, is entitled When Politics Are Sacralized, Comparative Perspectives on Religious Claims and Nationalisms. This is the work which will be the basis for her presentation today. And I've not yet read her latest book, published this year by Duke University Press, and entitled The Cunning of Gender Violence. But I'm sure it will rise to the same high standards in both research and readability as her others. And I look forward to getting a copy. Hint, hint. Among the ways, I'll buy my copy. Among the ways Dr. Nadera describes herself include as a university professor and department chair, as a researcher, a Palestinian feminist, a resident along with her husband Gabby, who is here with us today, Dr. Gabby Kevorkian, of the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem's Old City, and as a mother and I believe now a grandmother. Is that right? Congratulations. I do want to make one thing before I go ahead. I also just want to make a comment here. News came to us today, and I want to acknowledge this and maybe make this meeting in special honor of one person, and that is Dr. Bryce Harris, former professor at Occidental College. He was a longtime advocate for justice in Palestine and Israel, and he passed away this morning. And so we will dedicate this presentation to him. For the next hour or so, Dr. Kevorkian will, or Dr. Nadera, I'm going to prefer to use her first name. Dr. Nadera will be our guide to the subject of making politics sacred in occupied Jerusalem. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkain.
Thank you for a very kind introduction, and good morning, everybody. My condolences for your loss. I'm always honored to be here, share, think together, and look for modes, for ways of dealing with settler colonialism and Zionist settler colonialism. And this is what I will be really sharing with you today, but with a heavy heart, because as you know, the attack on Jenin was so vicious, so hard, and the reaction of the global community was harsher on us. In addition to this, we have a major attack on our area. You know, we live, as you've heard, in the old city of Jerusalem. Our Armenian Quarter, our own neighborhood, is under major disposition of the state. So what I will do, I will take you into what I mean by the sacralization of politics, explain it, and try to share with you also what goes on today in my home, in the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem. So let me start by explaining what do I mean by sacralized politics. So sacralization is turning politics into something sacred. For those of you that have read my work, my previous work in my book, Security Theology, Surveillance and the Politics of Fear, what I did is I showed that there are two theologies. Let me wait a couple of minutes here. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I will continue since we have people online. So there are two theologies. The first is the biblical theology, which is the one that I will be talking about today. And the second is the securitized theology. So as I started in Jenin, it was Israel security. That was the claim that was used and was, of course, turned into a religion. It's Israel security. And today I will look at the other side, which is the use of biblical claims and the fusion between religious claims and nationalism. So my definition of what is sacralized politics is that it is the practice of appealing to religious claims. God gave us the land, religious text, or religious beliefs to justify and legitimize state politics, including state violence. So when I say it, when politics are sacralized, or the sacralization, is really the use of religious claims, of religious texts, of religious beliefs to justify state politics. It can be dispossession, it can be elimination of the other, and so on. Second, it serves to authorize the power of one group and to establish not only their exclusive sovereignty over land, but their exclusive political authority, that they only belong to the land. So when you say Jews in Israel, well, God gave them the land. And how can you argue with God when you put one group up and the rest are the others and the otherized? So when I say sacralized politics, I really mean racialized politics, because it's about the racism of the sacralization. So sacralization of politics help us understand the way religion or ethnic affiliations become racialized makers of difference. So when you look at India and you look at the politics of Modi there regarding, so it's India is for the Hindus and the rest are out. So what about the Kashmiri? What about Muslims? What about Christians? What about the others? So the sacralization of politics, saying that India belongs only to the Hindus, or saying that the land of Palestine belongs only to Jews, is about the eviction of the other, eviction of people that are living there. Yeah. And the last point is that sacralization of politics creates a matrix of power within which political life can be lived or articulated through racialized, religiously based national or ethnic affiliation. And what do I mean by that? What I mean here is that all of a sudden there is this matrix, and this matrix affects our lives as Palestinians there, affects our lives as Jews there, affects our lives as Muslims there. Because when there's one group, there's racism in laws, there's racism in beliefs, there's racism in allocation of spaces, in allocation of life, and so on. So the sacralization, so the concept that I'm using, and of course in my book, I go into different cases. I look at India, I look at Sri Lanka, we look at, it's with my colleague Nadim Rahana, we look at really at Northern Ireland, and we really looked at different cases to explain. Of course, Zionism was really the major case that we looked at. Let me take you to Jerusalem, because as I promised, and I said that I will focus on the sacralization of politics in Jerusalem. This is over here, we have West Jerusalem and we have East Jerusalem. I'm trying to to show it on maps because I think that the only way we understand what goes on. So this one here is the old city. And bit by bit, I will start showing you the red spaces that you see is land that was confiscated in 1967. Yeah, and bit by bit, that area became green. The green land is an area that we as Palestinians are not able to build on, of course. Yeah, and then the building of different settlements. Of course, you know, today when we look at the French Hills, people would say, well, French Hills is part of Jerusalem, but French Hills is a settlement. Ramat Eshkol is a settlement. So the beginning of building the different roads, the different settlements, the different ways of dispossessing land, but doing it according to zoning, planning policies, and so on. So when you started by saying it's settler colonial, it is settler colonial. And what I just added to the map here is the construction of the Israeli separation wall. Again, the Israeli separation wall was built to claim that they are securitizing their people. But it was also about land dispossession, about here, Ma'ale and Dumim, this area is about also expanding the metropolitan of Jerusalem to include more land and to reduce the number demographically of Palestinians when talking about Jerusalem. So what we see here is we see that this is Jerusalem, this is the old city, and I will focus later on the old city, and this is the east side, and this is the west side. And of course, the construction of the Israeli separation wall. And the areas that Israel decided not to include bit by bit, what here I'm talking about Sheikh Saad, about Islam, Anata, and so on, were really kicked out of Jerusalem. So they were out of the metropolitan, leaving some neighborhoods, Aisawiye and Shafat and Beit Hanina. And bit by bit, also this area, as you know, for example, the area of Sheikh Jarrah, which is the area that was in the news lately regarding the settlements in Sheikh Jarrah, is an area that the settlers are taking over. So, of course, the blue sections are the new settlements that Israel have built, and it's claiming, of course, authority over the area. This is the old city. I'll come back to the old city, but as you see, you have the Christian quarter, Armenian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Jewish quarter. I will show you a little bit what goes on here in Silvan, which is the topic of my study and of my next book, inshallah, but in a couple of years, and just to show you how it is about land dispossession. That's the old city. From up, this is the Jewish quarter as it was prior to 1948. This is the Jewish quarter today. And of course, the settlements inside the old city, the red settlements are all clear. And this area, the black area is an area of Burj al-Laqlaq and so on, is an area under, of course, settlements and demolitions, because they go hand in hand. In that area. And of course, I will come back to where we live, to the Government Bardes, and to the dispossession of the Armenian land here. Story that doesn't have an ending at this point, but we're working on it. So as I have showed, the issue of Jerusalem and sacralization of politics is turning not only the person, not only life, but also land into something that's totally different. Because the claim here is that this is the land of one group, and this one group is the only one that can be there, and the rest should be affected totally. And this is what we see during the flag parade. I've spoken about this, I've written about it in my book, Security Theology, and the chanting, and I will share with you some of the chanting. But what we see major attacks in the name of sacralized politics, and these settlers are hard at work because they believe that every non-Jew should be out of the place. Yeah, so they're spitting in churches. This is the entrance to the Armenian Patriarchate. Of course, that Jesus is dead, that Jesus is whatever. attacks on Christian places, attacks on the mosque. I think you saw during Ramadan the major abuse against Muslim worshippers and so on. So we see from one side, as I have showed, land and the issue of space, and the space is about to be dispossessed to one group while evicting the other. And we see the entrance of new settlers. So when I say settler colonialism, I need you to remember, because to understand the sacralization of politics, we need to remember settler colonialism is a structure. So the state of Israel and the sacralization of politics is really embedded in a structure that affects laws, that affects planning, that affects zoning, it affects tourism, it affects transportation, where exactly the bus will pass and whose land we can dispossess or not. It's all embedded. It's a structure. So it's a structure, not an event. It's not one event. Oh, the Nakba happened in 1948. The Nakba is ongoing. It's really ongoing. So it's a structure, not an event. It's about the indigenization of the settler, as we see in Jerusalem, and the eviction of the native, and therefore the Judaization, and I will be talking about it. And three, it's embedded in the logic of elimination, as late Patrick Wolf have told us. So this is what I mean by settler colonialism, yeah? And when you use sacralization of politics to understand it, and you see how many settlers are coming into the old city, then Jerusalem, taking over, claiming areas, it's just fascinating. So as I've said, it's land, but it's demography. It's demography because you need to kick out the native. And how do you kick out the native? Demographically, you know, in early studies on demography in Israel, there was a professor called Amnon Sofer. And this Amnon Sofer, we used to say in Hebrew, Sofer Aravim, he counts how many Palestinians are there. Sofer in Hebrew means counting. And he was really counting how many Palestinians in and how many they can be kicked out. So most of the Palestinians in 1948 were displaced, were evicted, were left the area due to the hardship of the period of the Nakba, and they could not come back. Yeah, and as you know, in the law, those that tried to come back to Palestine were called infiltrators. Yeah, my own dad, my mom were part of those infiltrators that succeeded to infiltrate according to the law. To my dad and to my mom, they came back home. They wanted to come back to their families, but in Haifa, in Shu'amal, in Yafa, but that is not the story. So demography is a major factor. And as you look, when I look at Jerusalem, the plan is to have 70% Jews and 30% Arabs. Okay. And that was the plan actually in 2010. I think today the plan has changed. The ability to look at the documents in the Knesset and to see what are the plans, especially with the settler groups, Elad and Adet Kohanim, that are really implanting their settlers inside Jerusalem, is another story. Okay, the Judaization of the space. So there is a mode of spatiocide. And how do they do the Judaization? It's about the construction of the Israeli laws. The construction of the Israeli law evicted 55,000 Palestinians out. The 130,000 were affected. And of course, 3.7 million cannot even come to Jerusalem, cannot even visit, cannot meet, cannot come to my daughter's wedding if I have a friend or if I have a family member in Ramallah or in Beit Lahem or in Nablus or in Jenin. In addition, the issue of the checkpoints. Of course, there are the permanent checkpoints. Some of you would have passed through them, but there are the flying checkpoints. And those flying checkpoints in a minute can get into and prevent people from being inside. The permit system, which is another story, and the permit system is a serious system because having a permit to stay in Jerusalem affected everything in the life of Jerusalemites, because Jerusalemites should always prove that the center of life is Jerusalem. So if Gabby, my husband, doesn't have an Israeli passport, but he was born in Jerusalem. But if he leaves for a long time, his residency will be revoked, and if it will be revoked, they will give a permit. And I remember in my work on this in Jerusalem, there was a guy who came to study engineering in the U.S. and being in the U.S. for over 3 years. When he came back, he found out that his residency was revoked, and he could not stay. Although his family, his wife, his kids were there, but they lived beyond the checkpoint, which means he needed every time to pass with a permit in order to cross the checkpoint and to prove that he, his wife, and so on. And they needed to renew the permit, although he was an engineer in the UNDP. At one point, he crossed the checkpoint. He reached his house. He was 51 years old. He had a heart attack and died. And the family tried to bring him to the barrier inside Jerusalem. His family barrier is in Shalhoub-Kevorkain Street, and they refused. They said the permit expired, which is so telling. So those permit systems are beyond any permit system. Even as a dead body, a Palestinian was unable to cross the checkpoint and be buried. And of course, the issue of land confiscation and housing demolition. So as you see, we're talking about demography, we're talking about space and spatial side, and it's about the Judaization of the space, Judaization of the land. The issue of residency revocation is another issue where if they live abroad, as I have said, for 7 years, they become a permanent resident, but their residency can be revoked if they do not prove the center of life. It's a major issue, and we are worried about. When I look at the issue of domopolitics, which is really the killing of the home, because it's not only the spatial side, but it's really domopolitics, the politics of attacking Palestinian homes, which is a very major issue. We see settlers coming into Palestinian homes, and you see it frequently. You see it in land zoning. The land zoning, we do not really have the data as well, but what we have from the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is that 35% of the land in Jerusalem is dispossessed to settlers. 22% is green zones. Zone that are for Palestinians is 13%. But of course, getting a permit is a major struggle. And unplanned is 30%. Of course, this unplanned might end up being in the hands of the settlers. In addition, as you have noticed, this is from Visualizing Palestine. This is the Sheikh Jarrah story. So the Sheikh Jarrah story as the story of Palestine. If it's not the big land, but it's home by home, the attacks of one home after the other, and taking over the different areas. So it was either by the Israeli military, police, or the apartheid court that did not help, and the Israeli politicians. Ben-Gvir, who is now unfortunately our Minister of Interior Affairs, he is criminal. He was criminalized actually by the state of Israel, yet he is the minister, and he is really doing very, very bad. I want you to hear what Ben-Gvir, who is the minister who controls the police in Jerusalem, is saying. And this is one of his latest statements.
לא רק כאן, אלא בכל הגבעות שאנחנו רואים מסביבנו, צריך לייצר את ארץ ישראל, רק עם זאת, במקביל, בארץ, גם קצת בניינים, לחסל מחבלים, לא אחד, לא שתיים, אלא עשרות ומאות, ולמצוא גם אלפים, כי בסופו של דבר רק כאן אנחנו נעקוס כאן, נחזק את הספיקה, נחזיק את הביטחון התושבים, ומעל הכל, בנה את השליחות הגדולה שלנו, ארץ ישראל, ועם ישראל, תודה לכם, ישראל, על ההשקעה, על ההקרבה, אנחנו מקדמים אתכם.
I think that his words are really explaining what do I mean by sacralization of politics. Yeah, and every mean is possible. You demolish homes, you kill people, you kill hundreds, you kill thousands. This is a minister of interior, of the police minister, which should tell us exactly what do I mean by sorry. So from one side, you see demolitions of homes, evictions. Bulldozers are working hard. For those of you that do not know, not only the bulldozers come and bulldoze the houses, but also the payment for the bulldozers is paid by those that have lost their homes, which means Palestinians need to pay for the bulldozer. Therefore, lately, in the last couple of years, the Israeli system started giving another option to the Palestinians. If you demolish your house, you won't pay 30,000 shekels, which is about $10,000, or 40,000 shekels, or so on. So, and unfortunately, and I want to really stress the psychological toll of a person, a father, demolishing his own house in front of his kids. It carries major psychological toll. So the affective element is really heavy when dealing with demolitions. But demolitions are not only for homes. Demolitions are also for graveyards. And when I'm saying graveyards, I'm saying this is the USP graveyard. The USP graveyard, I think some of you would know that the Museum of Tolerance was built on the Mamilla graveyard. So from one side, you have the claim of the state to tolerance, and from the other side, it's a Muslim cemetery. Here, it's the USP graveyard. The demolition of this graveyard was hard. Me personally, I've written about it, and the claim is purely connected to sacralization of politics, because the claim of the state was that King David used to walk, and these are David's gardens, and therefore it should be taken from the hands of the Muslim community in the old city. So it's close to Rahma, the graveyard. So this is the USP here. And spending over hours talking to people that their kids were there. Actually, Ola Nababdi, her son, was, and I thought I would share with you, Ola sitting, protecting the graveyard of her son, and he was buried only 7-8 months before it was demolished. They pulled her by force using the police and took over, because King David used to walk there. So the use of biblical analysis, biblical claims, in order to justify demolition, in order to even turn graveyards. And we really saw bones, we saw teeth, it was a very, very tough experience to me, let alone to the people that they're and we live 10 minutes away from the USP graveyard. In addition, the issue of social engineering. And social engineering, there are technologies of evictions and dispossession that are hard at work. In my book, Incarcerated Childhood and the Politics of Unchilding, I really look at the amount and the effect on children, because children are the future. Yeah. And the amount of children incarcerated in Jerusalem, whether in prison or at home, is very high. There is no day we do not deal with another case of a child. And when you imprison, because I'm a criminologist, most of the criminological analysts would say, if you arrest a child at home, it's a better alternative to punishment. It's better from putting them in a prison. Yeah, that's the claim. Well, not in Palestine, because when you turn home into a prison and you turn parents into prison guard, you are really affecting the dynamic, the family dynamic, the psychosocial interactions inside the family. And again, I have a couple of articles on the issue of home arrest and on the issue of incarceration. And I am leading a major campaign to release a child who was imprisoned at the age of 13 years old. His name is Ahmed Manasra. Probably Some of you have seen and signed the petition. We have over 500,000 people asking the government of Israel. He was 13 years old with a major brain injury when his cousin was also shot and killed. And he is still not only incarcerated, Ahmed is in a very bad psychotic even condition. And he is in solitary confinement. And according to international law, solitary confinement after 14 days amount to torture. So, and he is, of course, a Jerusalemite. So it is about social engineering. It's about changing perceptions of youth, of children, of families towards life. And some of those that are able and can leave and not live under such conditions are leaving. I'm a mother of 3, and none of my girls are in Jerusalem. It's hard to live this constant suffocation. Yeah. So it's the technologies of eviction when the settler kids are there and our kids are really being evicted. And as I said, the issue of child arrest is a major issue that I write about and I think about. But I want to take you to continue the analysis on sacralization of politics and talk about Silvan, which is, if I look from the window of our house in the Armenian quarter, I can see Silvan. So this is the old city, and this is what they call the historic basin. Yeah, this is where we live, and this is the area all the way to Mount Scopus that is analyzed biblically by 2 settler groups. One is Elad and the other is Ateret Kohanim. And Elad and Ateret Kohanim are not only building settlements inside Wadi Hilwi. This is only one. It's the Hayy al-Bustan, the neighborhood of Bustan, and I work very closely with them, and Wadi Hilwi. And what they're doing is that they're digging under the houses. So demolition is not only demolition of existing home, but rather they're excavating. So archaeology, as the scholar Nadera has from Columbia says, was really one of the best tools to be used in the Israeli Zionist claims. So settlers are taking over Palestinian homes, and they also are digging. The head of Elad is David Be'eri, and he is also an ex-official in the military, and they are really digging under Palestinian homes. Some, for example, the school of the girls' school that belonged to the UNRWA really fell because they were digging, and at one point it really collapsed. Yeah. So this is in Silwan. So what we see in Silwan is that the settlers are really working in different ways. So these illegal settlements are really accomplished through state laws and policies. So it's discriminatory laws because they use the absentee property law. So if my auntie is not there for a while, they will claim her house, and the house will be given to Israeli settlers. Legal and administrative matters law, absentee properties, compensation laws. They siege trusts. So the case of Batn al-Hawa, which is also appointing members of Ateret Kohanim as trustees of the Bepedisti Trust. So if there's a trust, they would appoint either Elad or Ateret Kohanim, and Ateret Kohanim, these are the 2 very vicious settler groups. Sales without tenders, direct purchases from general custodian without issuing a tender. I think that our case, Armenian Patriarchate, is a bit different because in our case, I will explain it later, they use straw men and shell companies that are not existing to claim that they purchased. They did not purchase, they leased anyways, but it's about dispossession of land. And questionable acquisitions, again, according to my analysis, our Armenian, 25% of our Armenian quarter was taken by questionable acquisitions. So these are illegal modes of dispossessing. As you can see from the pictures, these are really digging under the homes, and therefore you see stairs falling, homes falling, apartments falling, schools are falling, and they are building really a whole city under it. And of course, the funding is a major issue because you were talking about 501(c). The question is how many organizations are getting sending money to Ateret Kohanim and Elad through the 501(c) here, the American Jews or Christian Zionists and so on. So in 2006, financial statement that Elad submitted to the Register of Nonprofit Organization stated that the total of Elad assist was more than 159 million shekels. Now, today is more because what they're doing is really expediting their work. At the beginning of 2008, the Deputy Registrar Corporation accepted Elad's request to have privilege over the names of its donors. So we do not know the donors. I go to one of the ways I pull my analysis is I go to the Knesset protocols. Knesset protocols are available, and if I need something, I can actually submit a request and get it. We don't know the names, who is giving them the money, which is another story that is. So the Minister of Justice at first refused, but then they accepted. They appointed members of Ateret Kohanim as trustees of the Benvenisti, and of course in Batn el-Hawa, so they came in and that a private-public collusion. And again, the custodian of absentee property law claimed that they can give some of the absentee land to Elad or Ateret Kohanim. Of course, the Jerusalem municipality, the police, the Minister of Tourism, and so on. So when I said settler colonialism is a structure, it's a structure that is functioning from all sides. And really, and at the same time, if you look at what David Be'eri, who's the head of Elad, whom I'm following, this is him hitting Palestinian kids in Silwan. That's David Be'eri. So if I look at Ateret Kohanim and I look at Elad, I built this for you to see how they function. So the Ministry of Justice is complicit. The Ministry of Finance is complicit. The Israeli Land Administration is complicit. The Jewish National Fund is complicit. Israel Nature and Parks Authority, because all of a sudden Yusfi graveyard is a park, yeah? It's King David who walked there, yeah? The Israeli Antique Authority that is allowing the excavation under homes, and that also allowed the barrier of some churches in our area because they opened where, again, I'll come back to the Goverumbar days. The Israeli Antique Authority is also complicit with the dispossession of the Armenian land. The Minister of Tourism, how are they doing tourism and where? The Minister of Transportation, Jerusalem Municipality, the Israeli Police and Border Police, the Minister of Housing and Private Guards, Israeli Military and Security Intelligence. So it is an assemblage of ministries that are really attacking from all sides. Of course, they're supporting Ateret Kohanim. And actually, some of the information about Ateret Kohanim tells me, at least when I'm reading the different papers, is that Ateret Kohanim is supporting the opposite, is giving money to the Minister of Antiques, to the Minister of Tourism, and therefore they manage really in their work, they manage to dispossess more. And the story is very interesting because my story is about Judaization, is about domopolitics and domicides killing any home, a Palestinian home, is about spatial side, and is about the eviction of the Palestinians. But the biblical story is different. And let me show you just one glimpse of the biblical story. And this is Silwan. So after all this, after the threats on demolishing and evicting, this is how the Israeli mind, of course, this is King David and his, look. So what you see is total different stories. from one side, the story of really the criminality of the state embedded in that structure, yeah, of the indigenization of the settler. And you see here the beautification, the romance, the colors, what I call in my work, the occupation of the senses. So they do not only occupy the land, they occupy the viscerals, the senses, what we see, what we hear, and they tell their kids, they tell their people around, they tell Christian Zionists. Yeah, the Christian Zionists are telling the same story, by the way. My next project is with Harvard is on Christian Zionism, because I'm like always surprised. How come we ended up in this situation? And why all the support? Why this beautification of criminality? Why this beautification of a genocidal politics? Yeah. So when people in Silwan wake up, they see the settlers' flags, they see the houses so on top of Palestinian homes, all of a sudden they decide to live. And that means security guards, that means police, that means major arrest of kids. That means if you go to families and you talk to a kid, I was talking to Kutaiba, who's the head of the community center in Silwan, and we were talking about a child who's 15-year-old. He was arrested, 15-year-old, he was arrested 17 times. Like, how can we continue functioning if this is not social engineering, if this is not a genocidal politics? What is it? Yeah. So when they wake up, they see this. And of course, this is from my, I took this picture. And as you see at night, you see the Star of Davis, and you see like a competition now between the Star of Davis and the crescent. So the fight is really aesthetics. I want to show you what are the songs, and since I'm talking about the occupation of the senses, and then I'll move 5 minutes, just talk a little bit about our area. Listen to what the settlers are saying in the wild and chanting. Yeah. So what we see, you see the claims are really sacralized. They're packed with sacralized politics. And I don't know how much you know, but lately, since the beginning of this year, the burning of churches, the flipping of graveyards of Christians, the attacks, the spitting on clergies is hard at work, and it's really increasing. At OCHA, the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, we used to check the amount of olive trees burned, olive trees uprooted, and so on. Today, we're also checking and collecting data on how many Christian places. And so it's this, and it's all in the name of God gave us the land. It's a biblical land. This is a settler in front of the Armenian convent, spitting and being beside the church, and it's very sad. I will show you only part of what happened, what latest report that was on the attack on Christians, and you can of course find it on the
people telling this place is our.
Yeah, I didn't want to show you the entire report, but it's a very good report that really shows the way sacralization of politics is really hard at work in Jerusalem. This is my last point, and my last point is really about the Armenian area. And this is, like, as I said, this is the old city. These are the settlements around, and this is where we are now standing regarding the Armenian situation. As you can see, this is here is trafficking, and it's the way to the here. So the entire area from the police station, all this area was taken. At this point, we're talking about shops, about cultural centers, about seminary for priests, and the big parking lot, or they call it gardens, or parties. And with and up with the inside the agreement, that it seems one of the members of the clergy in the patriarch worked with a group of Israeli rich millionaires from Australia. They have the right to take over or inside their patriarch without the permission or without the approval of Armenia. So what the story of the Armenian the dispossession of land against Armenian is a new story. It, of course, it started in the agreement of leasing that area for the sake of cleaning it up and turning it into a parking lot for everybody. Exactly what happened here, because there's here a big parking lot on our building. It's called the North Shame. This parking lot was also negotiated with the Armenian Patriarch. It's Armenian land. And the municipality. At one point, they said it's for public use, so they convinced the patriarch at that time to lease it for public use, including the use of Armenians. I live here. I cannot park here because it's not for Armenians, it's for Jews now. So we were evicted from this place. Today, the story is the story of the entire area, and that entire area is negotiated. The clear politics, as I showed in Silvan, and as I see in Sheikh Jarrah, as I see in Sur Baher, as I see in Ras Al Amud, is that they bring shell companies. And in the Armenian case, there is a new shell company that signed the agreement with the Patriarchate. Now, this company was not existing. There was no company the day they signed the agreement, but there is a company today. So there is something going on with strawmen that are really playing games, and the claim is that it was leased. So there's forgery. We don't know, because the Patriarchate is saying they did not approve it. All the papers are not open. They're probably using manipulation. They're using pressure. They quote something. We are not sure what is going on today. But 25% of the Armenian quarter was dispossessed by a group. And of course, the state system is working. So it's a settler-colonial plan of evicting. And we're talking about less than 1,000 Armenians. And this area is a very safe area when you compare it to other places, but they turned it into a really war area. And anyways, and we're still, and of course here we have the Sephardi chief rabbi saying that non-Jews are forbidden from living in the land of Israel. So clearly, they should be evicted. And again, so what I see, if I can conclude here, is that sacralization of politics, the use of religious claims, the use of planning, zoning, demography, laws, the legal system, the court system, the Supreme Court system, the police, the security, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of Antique, everything is really being affected by the sacralization of politics. As one of my colleagues, Nonoras Karkovsky, said, Zionism is is not a religious group. Zionism was really was not built on biblical claims, but God gave them the land. It's in God, and Ben-Gurion said, "The Bible is my title." So when we're talking about Jerusalem, what I'm saying is Jerusalem really, and especially Palestinians in Jerusalem, Palestinian Muslim, Palestinian Christian, Palestinian Armenian are really in danger because the plan is really not to have Palestinians. So there is a plan to evict, a plan to dispossess, a plan to affect our lives. And there is a major need for international and global intervention in preserving culture, in preserving religious beliefs, in preserving people's life and livability in their native land. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nadera. It's a little bit chilling here, of course, to hear all of this. We'll take some questions here, and I'm going to take the privilege of being the host here and ask the first one. I think a lot of people, their experience of Jerusalem is, of course, through mainstream media or alternative media. And we've seen in the last year or so an uptick in the violence, the confrontations that are going on in places like the Haram al-Sharif or the Temple Mount, as it's known many, and also the excluding of the Christians during Holy Week, during the Orthodox Holy Week. How do those fit in as examples of the type of sacralization of politics that you talked about?
Well, I think these are the examples from the last year, exactly the attack on worshippers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the attacks on Christians during Easter and during Palm Sunday, because, you know, we're used, this is the old city, so we're used to pray in the old city. So in order to come to Al-Aqsa Mosque, you need to come from Bab al-Amud, from Bab al-Zat, from the different gates to come to pray in the Holy Sepulchre for Palm Sunday. You need to really go through the old city, and they can't handle it. You know, the fact that Christian, for example, in our area, most of the scouts, whether on the during Ramadan or during Easter and Palm Sunday, our scouts are all over. So that you see them playing, and it was this time it was really viciously attacked. We've seen it in the Christian quarter, attacking priests, preventing spitting on Armenian priests, spitting on them because they were wearing the cross. Actually, in our area, there was a major cross that was it Khachadurian who put it there, and they asked them to take it out because they could not handle passing under a cross. Something that happened in our house in Haifa because I was born in a place that was a church, a Savior church, and my dad needed to cut the cross in order to prevent the spitting. So you see it against, and I see it very viciously active because those settlers really believe. You need to talk to them. I know I teach at the Hebrew University. When I say occupied Jerusalem, some of my students that are settlers would say, no, this is, they call it the liberated Jerusalem. So they teach them, they're indoctrinated with beliefs that are so much embedded in sacralized bond.
Questions from the group here, please.
I know that the patient is lectures take place showing what's going on there. What is happening? How to take advantage that role of Nadera, being Palestinian, being born in Palestine. He masters both languages that people information that she socializes with the of both sides. Now it's very people of Israel don't feel wise by treating the Palestinians this way, having this kind of plans, settlements, etc., and big bias, treating them this way, they are giving the chance, creation for extremist groups are not realizing because as far as I know that PLO, the foundation was to share the people between Christians, Jews, and Muslims. They don't say that to keep out the Jews, no more Israel. Say, oh, we will live together. But by doing this, you have extremist groups. Then they will take the other. What do you think?
I'm not sure how we can summarize that question for those who are online. So I'd ask for future if we can keep our questions brief and to the point rather than making statements. But as I understand it, what you're saying is how do we find a way to live together? Because it doesn't seem like the current situation is conducive to people being able to live in harmony.
I think that the question is deeper. I think that what Dr. Aram is pointing is that this situation, this violence, exacerbate and creates more violence. This situation of dispossession of land, of life, of livability, of everydayness, of the mere walk to school is militarized, is really creating major rage. And rage is also normal under such conditions. Rage is very normal. I sit on the stairs of Bab al-Amud, Damascus Gate, and I watch what happens to kids on their way to school. Strip searching, body searching, arrest, violence. So it's not only what goes on in the house or in the land, it's also life. And the everydayness is affected by the state violence. And I'm a criminologist, therefore I really understand, and what you're saying resonates really with my analysis. We are about emotions, about affects. When we see this daily dispossession, where does that take us? Of course, it can definitely produce violence and more extremism. And therefore, when I put it, I really always try to say, let us stop it. How can you stop it? It cannot continue this way. It's a genocidal logic that is affecting the entire system. And that should stop. And there's no other way to stop this because we are outraged.
Other questions? Sir.
So going back to the Oslo Accords, where the attitude, Israel, especially the Jews, especially towards, let's have a two-state solution, let's have peace, enough wars, enough. I mean, this all ended by the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. How was that possible? Israel was a country of institutions. I mean, things cannot collapse by the murder of one political figure. How did that happen? And brought us to this day.
Yeah, is that the question is how did we reach here? Although the beginning was about two-state solution.
30 years ago.
30 years ago. Yeah, well, again, I'm a researcher, I'm an academic, I'm not a politician, but I can tell you there are no two states. It's home by home. How can you divide things? How can you, at one point there was a possibility. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, Arafat talked about it. Oslo is dead. It died long time ago. Nobody, Israelis did not respect the settlements in the Old City, the Armenian Quarter, taking the Armenian Quarter, Camp David, Annapolis, the Armenian Quarter was on the agenda, the first topic on the agenda. it fell in Camp David because the Arafat refused to let go of the Armenian quarter, and he said, no, this belongs to the Armenian church, and it's a Palestinian land, and Annapolis, the Armenian, but they are not listening. They are just dispossessing settler colonial system that is beyond that, with exclusivity, with sense of supremacy, with this sense of we are better than you. And again, resistance is a very normal reaction to this to the ongoing atrocities. So I have here, I think, very interesting. I think if I have it here, the different talks that were not, I did not put it, the different talks that were, since Oslo. But Oslo is that the two-state solution is that there are no states, two-state. We need to live together, and they should stop the dispossession of life, of land, and attacks. But they're not. We just saw what happened in Geneva.
Earl Francis.
Thank you. I'd like to invite everybody to join the Los Angeles Justice for Palestine. We're doing congressional visits, so we'd like to visit your conference. I'd love to get some of these slides. Is it possible to get your PowerPoint, of course? And the other thing is, I hear you talk about the genocidal policy, but when are we going to be able to start using the word genocide?
I don't know. Because I teach the Armenian genocide and I look at genocide studies, I think that it is genocidal, at least genocide logic. But I would like to ask you to read on Monday, Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, will be issuing her report. And I think you will find for the first time the word of apartheid, settler colonialism, genocide, and so on. So I think that we started moving towards using, because what is going on against the Gazans, what is going on in Jenin, what is going on in Jerusalem is really, really, really. In Hebron, we know what is happening in Palestine is really an ongoing Nakba. And we need to use the right word, and we need to find really proper ways of reacting, because it's only by pressure. Apartheid was, the global community was able to stop apartheid, South Africa, through global political economic pressure. I think this is what we need to do.
Dr. Leila? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Dr. Leila, go ahead.
I'm curious, as a president, well, just be part of the are there other voices different than the ones saw the Israelis themselves would not support what's happening, or having their own kind of resistance or own kind of rejection? Where are they? Because what's this right-wing movement for Israel who is reflected on happening. For those of us listening to media, we'll have a sense of where that opposition is. What's your sense? I'm curious about the reaction the university has to these subjects.
So quickly, just to summarize, other voices, both in society and especially at the university where you teach.
Well, there are voices. They're not enough. Previously, we had more voices. I was supervised by one of a South African Israeli who left Israel because of Israel's politics, and he was my PhD supervisor. He's the one who affected my career. I guess that there are voices, and there is lots of activism inside Israel, inside the academia as well. But not only not good enough, it's really shrinking lately. I must tell you that when I started, And I'm talking about 97, 98, when I finished my PhD, the voices were stronger against torture, against dispossession of land, and so on. Today we hear, but we're like, the focus is usually on, okay, let's look at the law and try to work with the law or and so on. And I keep on mentioning colonialism was done legally. Settler colonialism is being accomplished legally. So the legal system is not helping me. We need to counter it. The same with and maybe I will tell you about the departments of psychology and social work, where I also teach. I'm a legal scholar, but I'm also a mental health expert and a scholar, and I teach at the School of Social Work and Public Welfare. And over there, you hear barely voices. What bothers me is that we are not hearing from at least mental health workers, because listen, violence is not affecting Palestinians alone. Violence is affecting the kids. They come to my classes and I see they fear. The moment I say my name is Nadera, you should see the reactions. It takes them 4 weeks to absorb because they're traumatized. They look at me in that framing of terrorist. It takes 4 weeks for me to really create a family in the classroom. It's not easy. It's not easy. There are some professors. Our number as Palestinian professors is increasing. There are amazing voices in the Israeli academy against the Israeli occupation, against the situation in Jerusalem, against what's going on. The people that are demonstrating in Sheikh Jarrah, Palestinians will be in a minute in the prison. So mostly are Israeli leftists that are working. There are human rights organizations that are working. I was part of it, and in its board, Gisha, B'Tselem, Akri, and so on. But it's not good enough because the situation is not changing. The opposite, the settlers are getting stronger. And the academia is complicit. The Israeli academia is complicit. I say it openly. The Israeli academia should be more, vocal. When you frame things as terrorism, and I frame them as resistance, there's a major discrepancy. But listen, my classes and my students are all I have, are very precious, like my kids and my grandkids. And I really invest in explaining and in talking. Yeah, because I see its effect. And there is the Palestinian Global Mental Health Network that we are a major network in the UK, in France, in South Africa, in the US, and in Palestine. And we are trying also to raise awareness on what goes on. But again, look what happened to Lara Shiha, who's a professor of psychoanalysis, because she brought Palestine and she defended their book, she and Stefan, on psychoanalysis under occupation is telling. So there's also a struggle over there. But as you said, we continue. And I always say it, I don't have the luxury of being depressed. I need to keep on walking the walk, investing in my students, settlers or non-settlers, and believing that, yes, hope is there, we can continue.
I think I had a couple, 3 questions over here to the right. I apologize if I don't always see to the right quite as well.
Thank you very much. As Carl Francis mentioned, meeting with your congressional representatives with America, we give, approximately $4 billion a year in weapons and armaments to Israel. So obviously, trying to talk to those people is one thing. But the other thing that just every person has, the power that we have is the way we vote every day with our dollars. What we give our support to, what we withdraw our support from. And you can see that our same government that's giving that money is trying to make that harder, in that they are trying to criminalize and punish, both on a national level and in 35 states now have laws that punish you if you boycott Israel. But can you talk about the importance of the Canadian movement through boycotting and that?
Yeah. Well, again, as I said, it's the boycott and divestment BDS movement is really working hard, especially the last 10 years. You see, it started with Omar Barouti, but now it's really flourishing and it's affecting academic spaces, academic places, political economy. And it's asking the international community to really, and yes, what you have said is really important, to go to your congressional offices, to vote differently, to speak differently, to raise the issue. But the fact that it is criminalized in Israel, me talking about BDS is not a joke, or raising the issue is not a joke. So it is criminalized here, it's criminalized in Israel. So that turns it into a really very, very problematic tool, a problematic issue. But yes, it's one of the movement that is really talking about what goes on and requires international intervention to at least affect Israel's policy and prevent further atrocities.
And just as an update, yesterday, the state of New Hampshire became the 37th state to have passed legislation that would criminalize the BDS program in their state. There were other questions over on the side.
What is BDS?
I'm sorry, boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS. Yes.
Question. The Christians, we use the Bible references, and basically the Bible Israel. But in Latin America, they mostly Christians. Your eyes full of
Yeah, thank you. This is an important question. Latin America today is really affected by Christian Zionists. And Christian Zionists are playing a very important political role. I was in Chile in last November. I just came back from Puerto Rico. I'm working with my assistant in Colombia, and we are covering Brazil has major powers that are not only praying for Israel, using biblical claims, exactly what I said in terms of sacralization. And I'm starting a major project now with Harvard University when the first couple of speakers are from Latin America, because I see the connection between the sacralization of politics and the support and the military support to Israel and the purchase of guns, weapons, military weapons and guns, technology and so on. And when you're talking about Latin America, because it's that other, like this is not the US and Canada, they're being affected because they want the blessing of the big brother and so on. And politics is really, really, really low there, and it's serving the Zionist agenda. So what we're trying, my trip to Chile, because in Chile you have over 500,000 Palestinians. Palestinians own banks yet the power of Christian Zionism is very strong. And I also learned from my current work, because I'm preparing for my project at Harvard, and it will cover the global community. I think we really need, my project at Harvard is called Global Cartographies of Sacralization, which is we need a cartography, we need a map to see who is affected and how can we change and help people be more humane, especially in Latin America. So it really requires work. Americans are almost hopeless case, because the moment here, you just heard what happened yesterday in New Hampshire. It's really very sad what goes on here. I have hope. Yeah.
And also add that I think that the idea that you cannot criticize Israel because the Bible tells you can is an interpretation. And it's a Christian Zionist interpretation. I think just taking a look at the Hebrew prophets, they had no problem criticizing Israel's government when they felt it was necessary. And so I think that there is a long history of being able to separate the politics and the religion. So yes, please.
Of the argument of the Bible as it's not a legal document. It's just a spiritual and moral, let's say, human. Has that ever been a topic?
Yeah, well,
The Bible not being a legal document.
listen, there are so many churches that are taking this position, and really, I think I put the map of some churches that are really taking this and telling it's the interpretation of the Bible. It's not the Bible. It's not the religious claims. It's the interpretation of the religious claims. It's that interpretation that is giving power. It's not that we have problems with phrases and beliefs and so on. No, it's beyond that. It's the fact that you are interpreting, you're saying, pray for Israel, but this Israel today is not the Israel that was written about 2,000 years ago, okay? And when you're talking about Palestinians were in the land of Palestine, so that there are different ways to, I'm not a theologian. I don't want to go into theology. People are better than me. I'm just looking at the criminality of the state and the fact that what I see the churches and the people that are really going into Christian Zionism are really being complicit with the criminality of the state. This is why I'm looking at it.
I think one other thing I would add to that too is that a lot of the churches I think that you refer to, if you were to come to them with the argument that the Bible is not the law, they would say, no, it's above the law.
Yeah.
And so therefore the law has to serve the Bible, not the Bible serve the law. But that's one of the other. Another question back here.
Yeah,
Patrick.
I really appreciate what you have to say. Some thoughts that run around in my head right now are about the fact that in our own country we're dealing with a Christian dominionist movement, white Christian nationalism. And I also am thinking of the Jim Crow laws that we had that subjugated Black people in this country and did some of the same things that these criminal laws that are going on in Israel are doing. So just could you speak to a little bit of that? Those are thoughts that are coming around in my head. But white Christian nationalism is something we're struggling with. Like, how are we even going to be able to help the Palestinian people who can't even help ourselves try to avoid becoming Christianized government ourselves?
Thank you for your question. Listen, when I was thinking how to start, I actually wanted to start with Trump's behavior when he came to Jerusalem and he decided to give it to the Israelis without, and it's their 3,000 years, and then the politics that is so embedded in religious interpretations that are not really religious to me. But yes, what is happening here in America is worries me, because I see the cancellation of the critical race theories, in which is something that when I did my postdoc here, this is what I have learned, that this is how I was educated by Black scholars here that are amazing, and all of a sudden it's not. I draw my academic work from the history of slavery here. I draw my academic work from what happened in South Africa, in Africa with decolonization, the French colonization, Frantz Fanon. He was a psychiatrist, but he was the best to write about here. And I draw my analysis from what goes on in other countries such as Myanmar, where its head was San Suu Kyi was a Nobel Prize laureate, ended up abusing the Rohingyas. So I draw my analysis from what goes on in Latin America. I try to engage with such, but I think that America is in a very, very, very bad shape with this whiteness, with this supremacist approach. But this is exactly what we're facing with Zionism. It's that racism that is camouflaged with economic development, economic and power, and the power of the whiteness. And that is pure racism. So in sacralization, I see racism. In Zionism, I see racism. In whiteness in America, I see racism.
We'll take one or two more questions, but let me just add a comment. 6 days ago at this very location, at this very pulpit, Reverend Susan Russell was giving a presentation last Sunday on Christian nationalism. And as she went through her dozen or so slides that she had pointing out what Christian nationalism was all about, I sat there and I thought, 85% of this, I could just substitute the word Zionism for Christian nationalism, and it would be the same. And I think that that's a cogent analysis of that. So, Alex, Please.
So I just want to share in my personal experience that I really disturbed me. So I have friends who are very close for a long time. And we're having dinner and we're talking about Israel and they're Jewish. And as soon as I said something like, you know, the settlements and all of that, I was told that I'm an anti-Semite. I mean, our entire friendship sort of went down the drain just because I mentioned that one thing. And it so disturbed me that I guess I asked the question, you know, so what is your take on it? And he said, well, you know, Israel, the Palestine wasn't even a country when Israel came. They were just a bunch of nomads. I mean, what's the big deal? And it was just this kind of thing like, you know, the American Indians, like they were just a bunch of people, you know, what's the big deal? And I was so sad to hear this, that I guess it made me hopeless because it came down to the label of, as soon as you say this word, you're done. And it just shuts you off.
So maybe you could say a word about the weaponization of the word anti-Semitism. And maybe also, if you wish, you know, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism.
See, number one, my first reaction would be, these are not friends. Friends would talk, negotiate, think. Disagreement can happen, but the story of anti-Semitism is a major story. It's a really weapon to silence, a weapon to muffle any resistance to abuses. And it's used left and right. It's used to prevent life in Palestine. It's used to prevent funding to hospitals. It's used to prevent community organization, and the IHRI is another story of really silencing the academia, silencing human rights activism, silencing people's discussion. And it is, to you, you continue, and you're here in my talk, which tells me that you continue walking the walk. But to others, it's scary. And some people would say, I can't take it on my shoulder. And this is the real threat. The real threat is, as I see it in the academia, because there's the story of, for example, tenure. If you're on tenure track and you're saying something and you're framed as anti-Semitic, finito la commedia. There's no way you can find a job. There's no way you can get a tenure. Mm-hmm. I want to say something, that I'm at the Israeli academia. I'm very vocal. You can read me. The way I speak here is what I read, what I write. I feel it's easier for me to speak in the Israeli academia than to speak in the US. There's something weird about being in US academia. Every time I need to give a talk at one of the Ivy League universities, they need to call security. And I always wonder why, when I'm at the Hebrew University, and yes, they don't like what I say. They do not like it. These are really different perceptions, because when I talk about child abuse by the state, they call it child protection. No, this is a better way. And these are totally different perceptions. And I can fight with my own colleagues, but I can do that without worrying about my tenure, my progress, my ability to economic life, my ability to have friends. Even with friends, in my department, I have people that study terrorism, and I am the terrorist. And it's not easy. Like, my office sometimes feels like a graveyard, really. It's not easy, but we still talk to each other and we still argue. I read every single aspect they write in order to fight it back and to challenge it and to write out. I think that the fact that this anti-Semitism is, and using it as a tool, as a weapon to silence, is bad, because it shuts the consciousness, and it's immoral to do that. And this is what I feel with IHRA.
Sorry, can we just give another little experience? So I went to see, it's a long story, but So I was speaking to this gentleman who is Jewish, and we were talking about this issue. Sorry, I talk about, and I said, why is this happening? I mean, what's the justification of all these settlements, and why are you pushing so, And he looked at me and he said, why don't you mind your own business? Our country is our business. And then that's what my fury came. I'm also Armenian and Greek, so whatever. And I said, you know what? Then that's what the United States should have done in Germany when the Jews were massacred, and we should have minded our own business and not gone there. Is that what you're saying? Because it's the same thing. You're saying mind your own business when people are being massacred. Well, not massacred, but I mean the other kids. So I'm like, it's you can't just choose what's right and wrong. It's wrong both ways, Anyway, I'm just
Wrong, and we should keep on talking. And I always, when I teach the Armenian genocide, I always say the first gas chamber was against Armenian. The first gas chamber was during the Armenian genocide. And Hitler said it, yeah. Nobody remembers the Armenian genocide. And this country is not acknowledging, of course, Israel is not acknowledging the Armenian genocide, but that is very telling. Yes, you always need to speak, you always need to refuse. And no, not every Jew is against what we're saying. I must tell you, I have students who came as settlers with the Yumnika and so on. They flip. We need to keep on talking and convincing and doing it with love, because love is a practice of freedom. There's no other way.
Statement is often credited to Martin Luther King Jr. that the arc of the universe is bends towards justice, but I think we need to be out there on the edge, pulling it down, bending it further and further. Back in the corner, and I think we have one other, and then we'll wrap this up.
Thank you for talking about the just on the hopeful front, Israeli young are challenging the current. Take the swamp of the young is policies or
So is there a generational swing?
It's a great question that I don't think I can give you the right answer. I have the opportunity. I really have the opposite feeling. I have the opposite feeling that the young generation is more nationalistic, is more supremacist, is more, and because of the amount of investment in the young generation in Israel. And when you live feeling that you are control, you're the master. When I look at kids in our neighborhood, I mean, Armenian kids going to school on the way where Jewish kids are from. And do you see the difference? The way the Jewish kids feel the power over our parents. It scares you. When you see a 10-year-old pulling his belt to hit because there's a goal and he's a non-Jew, that is very tough. Education. And it's scary because every now and then I need to jump to the street and to save one of our kids on their way to school. And if you were with us yesterday night, I had that in my house, and we were talking about my daughter who was on the way to school with, and with the Garbekov notes with this read the rest that they go to school, the Armenian kids, and it was on Shabbat because on Saturday, because the Armenian school used to open on Saturday. And the settlers hit her and her friend because they said, you are not allowed. I remember her reaction and her trauma and her scream. So I guess the question is, how can we change? How can you tell a child, a 10-year-old Jewish kid, no, he is not below you. Palestinians are not less. We are all human. This is what we need to work on. This is major work. Israel failed big. if you see the kids in the streets, if you see what they're chanting, if you see the spraying on the wall, death to the Armenians, Armenians out, they don't care. So Muslims, they don't want. Armenians, they don't want. Christians, they don't want. They feel it's theirs. So this sacralization is really hitting the roots. And we read, and this is why I do it very carefully in my classes, because I feel with those kids, if you are raised to be something and you're not, how can you switch it? It takes time. But we need to do that. We need to do it to save them from their situation. And I wanted to say another point about here and in the Americans against the Indians here. The difference between Zionism and the settler colonial regime here is that over here they claim that it's killing the Indian and saving the child. Yeah, it's killing the Indian identity in the natives here, but they wanted to save the child. Yeah, they wanted to save them. They went to the church, was very complicit with the system to go and to open schools and boarding and so on. In Palestine, that is not the story. What I say in my book on unchilding, our kids are unchilded. They're not considered children. You can shoot, you can kill, you can imprison, you can incarcerate. That's what worries me. This is where the genocidal logic is embedded.
Perhaps a little bit more hopeful is I know there are studies recently here among American Jews that especially among young people you see a switch where there's less allegiance to the state of Israel and more allegiance to the idea of justice. So thank you for that. John, did you want to add something?
I have one question for you. Yeah, several of the people who are here today are part of the interfaith study group, where we connect with Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Our meetings go between temple, church, and mosques. And we talk to each other about lots of things. We share, we develop our common interest and develop a bond between one another. That's the intent. Is there anything going like that in Israel at all?
I'm not involved in. I don't know how to explain. I'm so immersed in supporting my community, doing research to uncover atrocities. And I think that I'm burned from the peace process and the use and I can say the prostitution of the word peace to the degree that it's very hard for me to come and sit and talk about coexistence when there is no existence for one side and for the other. So I'm not involved. I just teach, educate, and do it with love and with carefulness and write. And yes, I'm a vicious writer. I really write with the clarity in mind. But I think what you're doing is important. It's important to open up. But what I see today is I have the Christian Zionists that I need to all the time understand in order to build different power. I have the Muslim Zionists. And the Muslim Zionists are another catastrophe that we need to deal with. So the question is, how do we do that? And yes, we need other voices. My colleague at Berkeley, Hatem Bazian, works on Muslim Zionism. I work on Christian Zionism with my friend. We're trying. And I think that those meetings can really help.
I want to point out that we don't talk about this conflict in Israel. We don't talk about politics. We talk about our own humanity and finding that Jewish people, in fact, have a lot in common with Muslims. And the Muslims find out that they have a lot of
I was raised in Haifa. And we were one Palestinian family surrounded by Jewish neighbors, that took over the street and so on. And we managed, but the system of dispossession is not stopping. It's not stopping. It's ongoing. It's exacerbated by the global political support. And the global political support from the US is really what giving power. we need to know exactly to bring life and livability to a condition of really, it's a necropolitical condition. It's necropolitics. It's an economy of life and death. Who should live and who should die and how we should die. In Gaza, they're dying by suffocation. In Jerusalem, it's by slow death. In Jenin, it's by bombarding. This is the problem. There's a necropolitical regime at work.
Yeah, but in this atmosphere of hate, eventually, if we got rid of all the Palestinians, there are only Jewish people left, they would start to eat at each other. And the thing is that they're really missing out the benefit that all the diversity provides them. They're cheating themselves and starving themselves to death.
John, I think one of the questions is whether or not we will accept a pluralistic society, whether that's here in the United States,
Right.
or in India, or in Israel and Palestine, whether we're willing to accept the humanity of the other and to allow them their differences too, and somehow be able to live together in that. I know you and I have attended those meetings for many years of the Interfaith Study Group, and I appreciate the opportunities to get to know Muslims and Jews and other Christians and people of no faith at all who wander into the doors because of the topics that you bring up. But I also know it's almost impossible to talk about Israel-Palestine, and I don't know why, whether that's because we're not willing to accept the viewpoints of the other or what it might be. But we can talk about that further. There's one other question. Please, Layla.
Sometimes lack courage, stand up if someone uses the anti-Semitism weapon against them. Because what we heard today, I mean, it's egregious. We already knew it. And now it's just reinforced to us that the extent of this that is used, death to the Arabs, Muhammad is dead. We are afraid to talk about those things because we're afraid of disrupting the relationships that we have, and you can let those friends go because they aren't going to take to us right globally. Have the courage, and that's why some of us don't participate in interfaith dialogue because we're afraid to talk about this subject, so we leave it alone and we look at everything else. Of course, we have so much in common with human beings, but at a certain point, we have to take a world stand on something that's so important and so undeniable, regardless of how it makes people uncomfortable. When they hear them talk about it, like Dr. Nadera said, challenges its perception and paradigm among the students are Israelis who are settlers themselves, and yet they talk about the issue and are not afraid. But I find that sometimes we're very afraid of the effect it's going to have on our relationships, so we don't talk about the things.
What some of that we picked up online. Thank you, Dr. Layla.
Just a simple question. You mentioned solitary confinement. It lost how many days until this torture?
I mentioned Ahmed Manasra, the child of 13-year-old who was imprisoned in 2015, and he is almost now 2 years in solitary confinement with a psychological condition. And we have, as the Palestinian Global Mental Health Network have written a couple of reports, we talked to Congress people here because we really believe, as I said, it is the unchilding of Palestinians. They do not look at him as a child. And lately, only last week, the law, the Israeli law, totally changed not to look at kids under to be able to convict kids under the age of 14 in terrorism. So I think solitary confinement is one of the ways in which the Israeli system and the Israeli prison system is using against children, against people, and again, according to international law. Over 14 days of solitary confinement is considered torture. So we definitely can go and say there is torture against those kids. Ahmed lost his mind. Ahmed is in a very, very, very bad situation. You know, I'm here constantly following up. His parents were not allowed to visit him the last 2 months, and we needed to fight because the Israeli prison services had a problem with him. And all what we want is to give him treatment, because after his brain injury and his skull injury and his deprivation of his family, and he was 13, even if he did a crime, this is a child of 13-year-old, according to all laws, according to humanitarian law, according to the International Convention for Children's Rights. And again, the torture is, and this kid have lost, I'm telling you, he tried to call for help. He hurt himself. But nobody is listening. He is still in prison because he's considered and framed as terrorist. So this is the hardship in this case.
Unfortunately, we've really exceeded our time here for the people online. So we're going to have to draw it to a close. And I just want to take an opportunity to thank Dr. Nadera for her presentation. I'm sure you want to as well. I'm sure we have a few minutes offline here. Dr. Nader, I'm sure we'll be able to entertain any further questions that you have. And thank you all for coming. There's plenty of food and drink to be had still, so please enjoy yourself while we're here.
I'm too, and I want to be your friend. Stop the later.